The courtroom was silent until the judge dropped his gavel and said something no one expected. "Is that Michael Carter?" The entire room froze. Why? Because the man on trial wasn't just any criminal. He was the judge's childhood best friend. What happened next shocked everyone, and it might just change how you see justice forever. It was just another quiet Monday morning in courtroom 4B. Outside, the sun peeked through the gray clouds over the city, painting the courthouse steps in warm gold. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but routine. Lawyers shuffled stacks of paper, clerks murmured updates, and the gallery was filled with people waiting, some anxious, others bored, all expecting nothing more than another day of legal proceedings. Judge Ronald Harper took his place at the bench like he did every morning, precise, focused, and calm. He was a man known for his discipline, his unshakable sense of justice, and above all, his stone-cold demeanor. Over 20 years on the bench, not once had anyone seen him flinch, raise his voice unnecessarily, or betray a personal emotion in court. But that day would be different. The bailiff called the next case. State versus Michael Carter. Charge: armed. Robbery. The defendant entered slowly, handcuffed, flanked by 2 officers. He wore the standard orange jumpsuit, his face partially shadowed under harsh fluorescent lights. He looked around the courtroom with a calm, almost detached expression, until his eyes landed on the judge. And then everything stopped. Judge Harper's hand froze mid-motion, the gavel slipping from his fingers and striking the bench with an unintentional thud. For a moment, there was only silence. The air felt heavier. Even the scribbling of the court reporter's pen came to a halt. Harper leaned forward, peering closely at the man in front of him. His voice cracked through the silence, softer and more uncertain than anyone had ever heard it. "Is that Michael Carter?" A murmur rippled through the room like a sudden gust of wind. The officers glanced at each other, unsure whether to intervene. Michael blinked, shocked, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "It's me." The room gasped. Reporters in the back frantically started taking notes. A few people exchanged stunned glances. No one could believe what they were seeing. The man on trial for armed robbery wasn't just another criminal in Judge Harper's courtroom. He was the judge's childhood best friend. Ronald Harper sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. He didn't just know Michael Carter. He grew up with him. They'd lived 2 doors down from each other in one of Detroit's toughest neighborhoods, the kind of place where gunshots were common, but dreams were rare. They were inseparable as kids. They played basketball in the alley, built tree houses, shared sandwiches, and even once carved their initials into the old oak tree at the corner of Grandview and 8th. Michael had been smart, smarter than most. He was the one who fixed broken radios, who could talk their way out of trouble when they were caught sneaking into the movie theater. Ronald was quieter, more disciplined, but always admired Michael's fearless nature. But life had split them apart. Harper had won a scholarship to a private high school, then went to law school, while Michael stayed behind. No college, no mentors. Eventually, Michael had fallen into a life Harper only knew about from the headlines. Drugs, gangs, petty theft. Harper hadn't seen him in over 25 years. Now here he was, accused of a serious crime. In his courtroom. For a few seconds, Harper didn't know what to say. His thoughts were clouded, memories of laughter and childhood promises clashing with the man now in handcuffs before him. Michael's eyes didn't look angry. They didn't look defeated either. They looked tired, like someone who'd seen too much and carried too many regrets. Harper cleared his throat. "Court will take a short recess." He stood up quickly and disappeared into his chambers, leaving behind a courtroom buzzing with confusion. Inside his chambers, Harper stared at the wall. All his years on the bench hadn't prepared him for this moment. He was supposed to be neutral. Objective. Detached. But how could he be? This wasn't just another defendant. This was the boy who once gave him half of his lunch when his own family couldn't afford food. The friend who defended him from bullies. The same kid who told him, "You're going to make it out of here one day." And now Harper had made it. But Michael hadn't. 15 minutes later, Harper returned to the bench. He was composed again, but everyone could see something had changed. His voice was firm, but carried a strange gentleness. For the record, I must disclose that I know the defendant personally. We were friends many years ago. There were gasps again from the gallery. Due to this relationship, I have the right to recuse myself from this case. However, if the prosecution and defense agree, I may continue, as long as transparency is maintained. Everyone looked to Michael, who stood up and did something no one expected. He said, "Your Honor, I want you to hear this case." The courtroom went silent. "Because you're the only one who ever knew me before the world stopped believing in me. Maybe you still can." The trial was just beginning, but something else had already started. A story of second chances, of old wounds reopening but also healing, of a man who had spent his life upholding the law, now faced with the hardest decision of all, not just between guilt and innocence, but between punishment and redemption. And as the courtroom held its breath, one thing was certain: what happened next would shock everyone. The courtroom, usually a place of strict formality and cold judgment, suddenly felt like the setting of something far more human, something deeply personal. As Judge Ronald Harper stared at the man standing before him, Michael Carter, his usual stern expression began to fade. In its place was something no one in that courtroom had ever seen on the judge's face. Grief. Not the kind of grief that comes from losing a case or hearing a tragic testimony, but the raw, aching sorrow that comes from recognizing a ghost from the past. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, softened. His lips trembled slightly as if holding back a tide of emotions, long buried under years of discipline and duty. And then, just like that, memories came rushing back. He was no longer Judge Harper sitting high above a courtroom. He was Ronnie. A scrawny, shy kid riding a rusted red bike down the cracked sidewalks of Detroit's East Side, laughing as his best friend Michael raced beside him, always a little faster, a little louder, a little braver. They were kids with scraped knees, big dreams and barely enough food in the fridge, but together they felt like kings. Their world was small, just a few blocks of faded houses, corner stores, and the old woods behind the school. But it was theirs. Together they built forts out of plywood and blankets, played basketball on a crooked hoop nailed to a telephone pole, and sat under the stars talking about what they wanted to be when they grew up. "I'm going to be someone important, Mikey," Ronnie once said, age 12, holding a flashlight like a microphone. "A lawyer, or maybe a judge. I want to fix stuff. You know?" "Yeah." Michael had grinned, holding a slingshot like a sheriff's badge. "Then I'll be your bodyguard. Nobody messes with Judge Ronnie if I'm around." They laughed until their sides hurt. It was a time when the world still felt wide open. But as the courtroom returned to silence, so did the dreams of the past. They had been best friends, brothers in everything but blood, but life had other plans. Harper stayed focused in school. His mother worked 2 jobs and made sure he stayed off the streets. Teachers noticed his potential. He got into an advanced program, then a scholarship, then law school. Michael didn't have that same safety net. His father left when he was 10. His mother, battling addiction, could barely keep the lights on. With no one to guide him, Michael fell into the company of older boys, gangs, fast money, bad choices. By the time Harper left for college, Michael had already been arrested twice. By the time Harper passed the bar, Michael had disappeared from the neighborhood altogether. They hadn't spoken in over 25 years. But in this moment, standing across from each other in a courtroom divided by law, history, and time, they were no longer strangers. They were two boys who had once shared everything, now separated by decisions neither of them could fully control. As Judge Harper looked at Michael, older now, worn down by years of hardship, he didn't just see a criminal. He saw the friend who once shared half his sandwich when he forgot his lunch, the boy who stood up for him against bullies, the one who gave him his first real birthday gift, a pocket knife with his initials carved into the handle. What happened? To us? The judge thought silently. Michael glanced up, his eyes catching Harper's. There was no hate in them, no anger, just sadness, and something even harder to look at. Shame. He wasn't the same carefree boy from the bike rides and backyard battles. He was a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and stood now in front of someone who had made it out when he couldn't. The courtroom, though still full, felt like it had vanished. The audience, the lawyers, the bailiff, none of them mattered. There were only two people in that room who understood the weight of the moment. Harper cleared his throat, trying to hold back the emotion building in his chest. He couldn't cry. Not here. Not now. But inside he was breaking. What do I do now? He asked himself. Can I be fair? Can I do my job, knowing the boy I once loved like a brother is now the man facing years behind bars? He knew the law. He knew procedure, but none of that prepared him for this. There was no training, no legal precedent for the pain of seeing your past stand trial in front of you. Michael stood quietly, not saying a word, but his silence spoke volumes. I didn't want this either. I never wanted to end up here. But I did. And for the first time in decades, Harper felt the crushing guilt of survival, of making it out while someone he loved didn't. As the memory of those two boys flashed again, racing down the street, laughter in the wind, future in their eyes, Harper made a decision. He leaned forward, his voice low, almost fatherly. We're taking a short recess. With that, he stood and walked slowly into his chambers, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. No one knew what would happen next, but they all knew this wasn't just another trial. It was the collision of two lives, one who made it and one who could still be saved. After a tense recess, the courtroom doors opened once again. All eyes turned as Judge Ronald Harper stepped back to the bench. His face was more composed now, but traces of the storm that had just passed still lingered. His jaw was clenched tighter. His voice, usually smooth and authoritative, carried a weight it hadn't before. He looked directly at the courtroom and spoke with calm resolve. This court will proceed, he announced. However, I must disclose that I know the defendant personally. As such, in the interest of impartiality, I will recuse myself from overseeing this trial. A ripple of surprise swept through the gallery. The tension seemed to lift, but only for a moment, because then something completely unexpected happened. Michael Carter, the man in handcuffs, stood up. His movements were slow but deliberate, and his voice cut through the silence like a blade. Your Honor, please. The room froze. Judges don't get interrupted, especially not by the defendant. But Harper didn't stop him. He didn't bang his gavel or silence him. He simply looked at him like he already knew something important was about to be said. Michael took a shaky breath and continued. I don't want anyone else to hear this case. I want you to judge me. Gasps filled the room again. Even the court reporter paused, unsure whether to keep typing. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. The defense attorney looked stunned. And Judge Harper blinked, caught completely off guard. Why? Harper asked quietly, almost as if he was asking not as a judge, but as the boy who used to race bikes, with Michael down Grandview Avenue. Michael's voice cracked. Because you're the only person in this world who ever saw the good in me. Maybe you still can. For a second, even the ceiling fans seemed to stop spinning. The raw vulnerability in Michael's words hit harder than any argument a lawyer could have made. He wasn't pleading for pity. He was reaching out to the last piece of his past that hadn't abandoned him. After a whispered conversation between the legal teams and court clerk, a highly unusual decision was made. Both the prosecution and defense agreed, on the record, that Judge Harper could continue presiding over the case as long as full transparency was maintained. It was unprecedented, yes, but in that moment, everyone knew this wasn't just a legal case. It was something bigger, a human story unfolding before their eyes. "Very well," Judge Harper said. "We'll proceed." And so, the trial began. Evidence was laid out in meticulous detail. Surveillance footage showed Michael at the scene of the crime, a gas station that had been robbed 2 months prior. He was clearly visible on camera, standing near the door as 2 masked men rushed behind the counter and took cash and cigarettes at gunpoint. Michael never denied being there, but he stood by his claim. He was not armed, and he didn't touch anyone. His lawyer explained that Michael had gotten a ride from a friend, unaware of the robbery plan until it was already in motion. He panicked, the defense attorney argued. He didn't run because he was scared, not of the law, but of what his life had become, of what it would look like to people who once believed in him. Witnesses testified. The gas station clerk confirmed that Michael never made a threatening move, never brandished a weapon, and even appeared to hesitate at the door as if frozen by indecision. But the prosecution pushed back hard. He was there. He didn't call the police. He didn't warn the clerk. He didn't walk away. That makes him an accomplice, the prosecutor stated firmly. They presented Michael's prior record: petty theft, a few misdemeanor charges from years earlier, enough to paint a picture of a man who had repeatedly made bad decisions. Still, something felt different. Judge Harper listened carefully, never once interrupting. But those who knew him could see it. Behind the judicial poise, his heart was breaking. Each day of the trial felt heavier than the last. For Harper, it was like watching 2 timelines collide, the one where Michael had made it out and the one where he hadn't. He found himself wondering, what if our roles were reversed? What if I had stayed? Would I be the one in that jumpsuit? During a recess, Harper sat in his chambers and stared at the wall. He remembered a summer day when he and Michael were 13. They had scraped together change to buy one comic book and spent hours lying in the grass passing it back and forth. "One day, we'll make our own stories," Michael had said, dreaming of better days. And now, here they were, in a story no one would have believed. On the 4th day, Michael took the stand. His voice was steady, but his eyes told the story of a man worn down by guilt. "I was lost, Your Honor. I've made mistakes. I'm not proud of where I ended up. But I didn't plan that robbery. I didn't know it was going to happen, and I didn't hurt anyone. That's the truth." He paused. "But if you think I deserve to pay for being weak, for being scared, then I'll accept that. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not from a file." The courtroom was silent. There were no closing statements that day. Judge Harper adjourned the session quietly. But one thing was clear to everyone in that room. This wasn't just a criminal trial. It was a test of judgment, friendship, and forgiveness. And no matter the outcome, the world would never forget the day a judge was asked to decide not just a case, but the fate of a childhood promise. The final day of the trial felt different. The courtroom, usually buzzing with low chatter and the rustle of papers, was heavy with anticipation. Word had gotten out. Local media outlets crowded outside the courthouse. Headlines swirled. "Judge oversees trial of childhood friend. Conflict or compassion?" Inside, the air was thick with tension. Even the jurors, though dismissed, since Michael had opted for a bench trial, had lingered near the public gallery. Everyone wanted to know what Judge Ronald Harper would decide. After hours of silence behind closed doors, Judge Harper finally returned to the bench. The room stood, then sat, all eyes locked on him. His robe looked heavier today, as if carrying not just the law, but the weight of 2 lifetimes. He didn't immediately speak. Instead, he looked directly at Michael, seated just 20 feet away but separated by decades of choices, circumstances, and pain. The pause seemed eternal. Then his voice, firm yet deeply human, broke the silence. Michael. He let the name hang there a moment, as if it deserved to be acknowledged not as a case number, but as a person. You were part of something that could have ended someone's life. An armed robbery is no small matter. You stood at that door. You didn't intervene. You didn't call for help. That night could have ended very differently. And for that, this court believes there must be accountability. Michael nodded silently. He didn't flinch. He had expected this. He had braced for prison. But then Harper continued, his voice softening. However, this court also sees something else, something we rarely get to witness in cases like these. The room leaned in, breathless. We see regret. We see honesty. We see the beginning of change. Michael's eyes welled with tears. He didn't dare blink, didn't want to miss a single word. You didn't lie. You didn't blame anyone else. And you didn't ask for mercy. You asked for someone to believe that the good in you wasn't gone. Harper paused, the emotion in his voice now unmistakable. So here is this court's decision. You will not go to prison. A shocked gasp rippled across the room. Instead, you are sentenced to 2 years in a court-supervised rehabilitation and restorative justice program. You will live under strict conditions. You will work. You will study. And you will appear before this court every month to show your progress. For a long moment, the room was completely silent. You could have heard a paperclip drop. Michael, stunned, brought a trembling hand to his mouth. Tears streamed down his face. He didn't speak. He couldn't. But the gratitude in his expression said everything. Thank you, he whispered, finally. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Harper looked down at his bench, maybe to collect himself, maybe to hold back his own tears, then stood. And just when everyone thought the case was over, Harper spoke again. But this time, not as a judge, as a friend, as a man who still believed in second chances. Michael, when you've completed the program, I want you to come back. The courtroom tensed again. Not for another hearing, not as a defendant. He took a breath. I want you to come work with me in the court's youth outreach program. Even the cameras outside couldn't have captured the moment that followed. No lens could do justice to the way time stood still, or the raw emotion on every face in that room. We've got kids walking the same road you did, Harper continued. Some of them already think it's too late for them. Maybe with your story, your honesty, we can save one more. Michael buried his face in his hands. The sob that escaped him was not one of shame anymore, but of release. Hope had walked into that courtroom in handcuffs, and now it was walking out with a mission. The courtroom slowly emptied, but no one was the same. Reporters outside didn't just get a story. They witnessed a moment of humanity that transcended headlines. A ruling not just of law, but of heart. Michael Carter was taken into custody, not to be locked away, but to be placed into a program designed to break cycles, not lives. One built on mentorship, therapy, education, and community service. Judge Harper removed his robe that evening in his chambers and sat quietly for a long time. On his desk sat an old photograph, 2 boys, arms around each other, smiling on a summer day long gone. He reached out and tapped the glass frame gently. We're not done yet, Mikey, he whispered. A year passed, and on a rainy Thursday morning, a small group of teenagers gathered in a courthouse conference room. They were angry, confused, tired of being labeled as lost causes. A tall man walked in and stood at the front. My name is Michael Carter, he said, and I know exactly where you are right now, because I've been there too, and thus a new chapter began. Not of crime, not of punishment, but of purpose. Because sometimes the greatest verdict a courtroom can deliver is not guilt or innocence. It's the chance to be someone better. Together. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk like bees, microphones raised, cameras flashing, their voices overlapping as they shouted for a comment. Judge Harper, can you say more about your decision? Michael, do you believe justice was served? Is this a conflict of interest or a story of redemption? But neither man responded. Judge Ronald Harper walked quietly down the courthouse steps, his face calm but unreadable. He didn't wave. He didn't stop to speak. He simply moved toward his car, his black robe fluttering behind him like a flag of quiet resolve. Behind him, standing alone on the courthouse steps, was Michael Carter. Wasn't in cuffs anymore. No jumpsuit. Just a simple shirt, a tired but genuine smile on his face. A smile no one had seen in years, maybe decades. A smile that spoke of something long forgotten. Hope. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a statistic. He didn't feel like a cautionary tale. He felt like a man who had been seen, and more importantly, given a second chance to be someone new. In the weeks that followed, Michael kept his word. No media interviews, no attention-seeking, just the quiet work of transformation. He attended every session of the court-mandated rehabilitation program. Not once was he late. Not once did he skip, but that was just the beginning. Michael threw himself into service. He began speaking to local high school students, telling them the truth about the streets, not the glorified version, but the real version. The pain, the regret, the price. I stood outside a gas station thinking I was just watching my friends, he told one group. But that day changed my life. I could have ended up in prison, or worse, someone else could have. The students didn't always clap, some didn't even look up, but Michael saw himself in their faces. He saw the same anger, the same confusion, the same hunger to be understood, and that was enough. Then one day, a 16-year-old boy named Andre showed up at one of Michael's sessions. Tall, quiet, angry. He didn't want to be there. His probation officer made him come. After the session, Andre stayed behind. "That's stuff you said," he muttered, not making eye contact. "You really think it's not too late for someone like me?" Michael smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "I know it's not," he said, "because I'm standing right here, talking to you." That was the start of something new. Andre began meeting with Michael weekly. They talked about life, about choices, about mistakes and recovery. Over time, others joined. Michael wasn't just fulfilling a sentence. He was becoming a mentor, a guide for kids who still had time to turn their lives around. One by one, he was helping them find the off-ramp from the road he had once taken. Meanwhile, back in courtroom, 4B, something had shifted. Judge Harper, once known for being stern and by the book, started asking different questions during sentencing. He didn't go soft on crime. His decisions were still grounded in justice. But now, they carried something else. Understanding, compassion, purpose. He pushed for rehabilitation programs more often. He recommended community service over incarceration when appropriate. He met privately with counselors and educators to build better partnerships between the courts and local schools. To his staff, Harper seemed lighter, more human, less like a man weighed down by the system, and more like someone who believed in what the system could be. He even began visiting the outreach center once a month, not in robes but in regular clothes, just to sit in the back and listen to Michael talk. They didn't say much to each other during those visits. A nod here, a glance there. But they didn't need words. They had already shared a lifetime. Exactly 1 year to the day after the trial ended, the court held a special event honoring its youth outreach program's expansion. Judge Harper stood at the podium, surrounded by community leaders and families. 1 year ago, he said, This court faced a decision that went far beyond legal procedure. We had to ask a hard question. Not just what does the law say, but what does justice look like when mercy is possible? He paused, then smiled. And today, I'd like to invite someone to the stage who's helping us answer that question. Every single day. Michael stepped up, wearing a fitted shirt and a lanyard that read Youth Outreach Coordinator. The applause was thunderous. He didn't speak long, just a few words. I made a lot of mistakes, but someone believed I could still be more than the worst thing I ever did. And now all I want is to pass that gift on. Outside the courthouse that day, there were cameras again, reporters, noise. But this time, it wasn't scandal they were chasing. It was a story of redemption. Two men, once boys who rode bikes together through broken neighborhoods, had taken two very different paths through life. But those paths had led them back to the same place, not to a courtroom divided by fate, but to a mission united by hope. Because sometimes, life brings people back together for a reason, and sometimes, a second chance is all it takes to rewrite. The ending. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were the judge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy true stories with powerful life lessons, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes one second chance can change everything.